Good morning. Well, I guess afternoon at this point, everyone. Welcome to the Cleveland Museum of Natural History's Scientist Saturdays. My name's Lee. I'm in charge of our video conferencing content for school programs, as you can see with the sign behind me. Been teaching a lot of programs at home during our quarantine period and having the pleasure of interviewing lots of awesome museum scientists. And today I get to interview, I'm going to read her title off my little piece of paper here so I don't mess it up, Dr. Nicole Burt, who is our curator of human health and evolutionary medicine. Dr. Burt, are you out there somewhere?
Hi, Lee.
Good morning. Oh, it's time for
Afternoon.
camera shenanigans. Yeah, exactly. Hey, thanks for joining us here from your home today. I know you've been working from home a little bit, correct?
Yes. Working on my laptop, trying not to get distracted by kitty cats.
Right. I guess I shouldn't say a little bit because, gosh, it's been, what, a month and a half or so doing lots of work from home. And you and I have actually had the pleasure of working at the museum together as well, since I get to teach nutrition programs. And then I like to link those programs into our curator's research. And your title, I think people can probably figure out human health, but the evolutionary medicine, that's an interesting one. Let's start off by you explaining what precisely does that title mean?
Yeah, so it's broad, right? So human health and evolutionary medicine sounds like it's something different, but evolutionary medicine really is what all medicine is, right? It's understanding medicine and health in light of how humans have evolved and how that affects both our bodies and our immune system and our relationship to disease. So it's not actually something different. It's a way of thinking about and conceptualizing health.
Humans are very different animals, however, because I do like to point that out to kids that we're weird. We're the only animal that does agriculture. We're the only animal that drinks the milk from other species. I love working in all those, and you're wonderful about that too, working in all those humans are weird comments.
Right. Well, I'm a biological anthropologist by training. So we study humans, biology, and culture, right? And culture is all that weird stuff that you're talking about.
It's just fun saying humans are weird. And because we're going to be watching portions of a video that were recorded with my buddy Lee Hall, I know, folks, so many Lees running around these Scientist Saturdays, and you're taking a look at some different specimens, I thought maybe we'd start off with a specimen that both you and I have used in teaching, and it actually might be featured in the video too, but I have it here at home because I've been using it to teach our nutrition classes. And how about this? I'm going to do a little screen share here and get that specimen up there, and then you can tell our audience what it is and why it's important in your research.
Yeah, so this is a fetal skull. So it is a human skull. I know they look like aliens. They're not. They're just babies. It takes a while for the skull to get larger, and obviously most obviously probably the soft spots, which are so that as the skull grows, there's space for that brain to get bigger. In terms of what I talk about in my research, if you want to flip it so that we can see his cute little face there, teeth, deciduous teeth, your first set of teeth that you get, actually start forming in utero. So they're start forming before you're born. And you can actually see, hopefully they can see, that there's kind of puffy parts on the jaws, right? So the upper maxilla there and the mandible. And that's because there's actually already teeth forming in those crypts. So once we start talking about diet, which is what my research is on in a minute, we can see that like teeth start forming so earlier that we can just track diet over a tremendous period of time using teeth.
Whenever I show a specimen like that to my students, naturally their very next question is that real? And how did you get this human baby skull? And I must explain that. So maybe we should do that too. Could you talk a little bit about our famous Hammond Todd collection?
Yeah, so we have a very large, one of the largest collections of donated human skeletons. So they're a medical collection. So they all would have been part of an initial medical school donation that then came to us. So they have known data. So we know all the data on them, and we have the skeletons from them. They're all from around the turn of the century. So they're quite old Clevelanders. And it's just like a really important educational sample of humans. So all skeletons and knowledge about their lives.
That's
one of the
my
things I like to tell
favorite
people,
collection.
remember.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Too polite. Is that
I know. It's the challenge of Facebook and the whole delay thing.
Yeah. They're people, right? And so there's ethics involved always with dealing with both modern people and skeletal remains because they're people and we want to be respectful of that.
Absolutely. And that is one of the things I love to point out to the kids is that this is a research collection. It's there that we can utilize like this infant skull for teaching.
Mhm.
And it's one of the biggest, most revered. I mean, people come from all over the world to work in there and learn about human skeletons. And it just reinforces the fact that when you think of a museum, it's not just a bunch of things positioned to go look at. A lot of museums have active research going on.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And somebody's knocking at my door exactly right now. So how about this? In order for me to go and tell them that I'm in the middle of an interview, do you mind if we just jump right to the first section of that video and then we'll come right back?
Yeah, let's do it.
Live, folks. It's live. Thanks.
We're here with Dr. Nicole Burt, who is the curator of human health and evolutionary medicine at the museum. Hi, Nikki. Thanks for having us.
No problem. Thanks for talking to me about teeth today.
Yeah, so you specialize in teeth, human teeth, and you have an array of interesting objects here. Please take us through this wonderful world of dentition.
Yeah, so I have worked on different aspects of teeth. So I've talked about development of teeth and also reconstructing diet. So teeth are great little capsules. So they start forming fetally, so when you're a baby. So you get two sets of teeth, which hopefully everyone knows that they had two sets of teeth. So there's baby teeth, which is your first set, and then you get your permanent teeth, which come on top and push out the baby teeth. And then I collect those baby teeth, and
Your tooth fairy joke.
The tooth fairy joke, yeah. So you collect the baby teeth, and then you can sample them and figure out what people were eating when they were between like fetal to 3 years of age.
Okay, so before we get too far into what you do with that information, how do you sample a tooth? What do you do once you get it?
Yeah, so they take it out, and teeth are pretty small. So you can see that they're not too big. These are actually permanent teeth, so they're bigger than what I usually work with. But what you would do is you would take it and you want to section it longitudinally. So teeth, crown, part that sticks out, roots, and you want to cut it down the center and pop it open.
Okay.
And then this is all the great dentin, which is actually a connective tissue. So it's collagen-based tissue, like skin or hair or something like that.
Okay.
And so you have to cut it open to get on it. And the idea is we're trying to make a thin section.
I see.
And when I do this, I can track how old the child was when that part of the tooth was made.
So you take the baby tooth, and then you set it into this little vise
Yep.
here.
So I adapted this vise. So I actually made this myself. So handy.
Can I say it shows?
Yeah, thanks. It does. It does. Hey, with love. So you put the tooth in to the vise section, and you would clamp it down. And this is just a standard Dremel tool that I've modified to have like a drill press set up. So you would line it up underneath, and using my diamond-tipped blade there to cut through the teeth, just like your dentists use. You then would push this down nice and slowly while it's on and making a lot of noise and blowing up a lot of dust. And you cut the tooth in half. And then you have two parts. So one part I can use for isotopic analysis,
Okay.
and the other part I can make a slide over. So then I have to make a second cut. So I take a small tooth, cut it in half, and make an even smaller tooth, and cut it again.
Okay.
So then you reclamp it in, and you cut it a second time, and you end up with great little tooth sections that are just about a millimeter or so thick, which I did this with that saw setup.
It's like a little
So you can
tooth
see
chip.
it is a little tooth chip, because you want to use as least amount as possible, so you are maintaining enough tooth to actually test, and you want to be able to use a microscope to look at this and actually see the growth lines, because teeth grow regularly.
So this looks, just the same as
Yeah,
as
so
this
these are the
model
same
here.
type of tooth. So this is a
You
canine.
can see the layers of the
Yeah.
enamel and the dentine.
Yep. Yeah, so what I usually am actually looking for is the dentine. So the part you shouldn't, hopefully, do not see in your own tooth, because that's bad.
Some are luckier than others.
Some
in
of
that
us are
regard.
luckier than others, yes. And so
That's a good line. You should never see this in real life, folks. You should not see the inside of your own teeth.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully that go to the dentist if you
Right.
can see the inside of your own tooth.
Oh my gosh, so many questions just from that very beginning part of that video. First of all, you said you made your own. What is that thing you're using? You're so crafty.
Yeah. So yeah, so the Dremel tool is a known tool, and they actually do make that kind of drop down saw press now. But when I first needed to do this research, they didn't have it. So actually, with the help of my father, we built that contraction to modify the vise and that. And I will say that being handy and like modifying tools for your research is like a key thing that all scientists need to be able to do. Because whenever you're trying to do something new, that means no one has made you the tool to do it yet.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, I feel like a lot of folks saw the movie The Martian, and that's what they started thinking about then was, man,
Yeah,
that guy had to figure everything out. But scientists do that all the time. They're constantly thinking, I wish
exactly.
there was a tool, and then they make it. That's really
Hmm.
neat. And rings of it, like when he said growing, or you said growing rings, like a tree. Is that the kind of rings you mean?
Yeah, so it's incremental the way trees grow, right? So they start forming at the crown or the top, and then they form incrementally down. Um, and that means that you can track growth over time down the tooth. Like there's some very technical terms for that, right? So the lines of Retzius are what you're actually seeing when you cut it and put it under polarized light. You can also see the neonatal line, which is a specific one of those growth lines that occurs because at birth there's like a pause in the system, which changes the orientation of the mineral deposition so that you can see it, right? Um, I think I mentioned it in the video as well, but teeth are alive, but they still have a mineral component. So you're looking both at the minerals, but then you can also look at the organic parts of the tooth at the same time.
Gotcha. Is that I feel like I've learned the word for that mineral before. Is it something like hydroxyapatite? Is that close?
You are correct. Yes.
Oh
Look at you,
yes.
Lee.
Score. That was even before
More
coffee,
weird
folks.
words for everybody.
Seriously. We've got some of our viewers intrigued about your background since you're over there building tools and things. So Adam was
Yeah.
asking about your background prior to working at the museum.
So the tool use, I think, is more from having a more arts background. I think people don't always realize it, but science is I think, a very creative endeavor. So a lot of art classes, welding classes, just growing up in northern Wisconsin and having tools and things around. So that's my familiarity with like tools and making things probably came from that. But yeah, an anthropologist. So anthropology, I think, is one of the broadest, most interdisciplinary fields, right? So you got to know a little bit about everything, right? It's a social science, but it's also a hard lab science. You got to know a little bit of chemistry. Personally, I like that, but some people find that to be um, a lot. A little
I'll
bit of
admit that
everything.
the organic chemistry is what really blew me out of the water in college. That's some hard stuff, man.
It
You got to
is.
be ready to
It
deal with that.
is.
Yeah.
But
And speaking of
everything is physics or
chemistry,
chemistry if you go far enough back, right? So like I study a human organism, but you could always break something down into the smaller parts, right? So when we talk about health, it can always go into its constituent parts, right? So you could talk about the cells and how they interact in your body, including your microbiome. You could go into the chemical processes, like are the chemicals binding and breaking down properly? All of this. So like everything really is chemistry and physics if you go deep enough.
I joke about that with the kids a lot when I'm writing out the equation for photosynthesis or cellular
Yeah.
respiration, C6H12.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, this is the thing that messed me up in school, and now I teach about it. How crazy is that? Speaking of chemistry, I forgot if in the
Mhm.
first part of the video, but I know in the second part, you and Lee Hall are going to toss out the word isotopes quite a lot. So just to make
Yeah.
sure that our audience is like, what's that? Could you explain what an isotope is?
Yeah, I think so. I've mentioned a few times that I study diet. And so one of the ways that you can do that is asking people, which makes sense in a modern context, but you can also reconstruct diet using isotopes because all the elements that you eat are what make it into your body. So the carbon and nitrogen that you eat is what makes up the carbon and nitrogen in your body. And as you hopefully everyone recalls, we are carbon-based life forms. So lots of carbon. So the isotope, all it means is that for each element, there is slight variations in the nucleus. So they all have the same number of protons, but they can have different numbers of neutrons, which just slightly changes their mass. And using a mass spectrometer, we can measure that. So there's heavier isotopes and lighter ones. And these are all stable isotopes, what we deal with. So you may have heard of radiocarbon dating. That's with the non-stable isotope. So it decays over time. So you can track time with that because it's decaying at a regular rate. The stable isotopes, once they're incorporated, they essentially stay the same. So because of that, they do incorporate through chemistry. We're talking a lot of chemistry here today. So they have different chemical properties. So you'll have different ratios of heavy to light isotopes in things. So you can actually track things like the food web and what you're eating because there's different amounts in different types of food. So yeah, there's a lot of moving parts
and if
in that, but it's
and if that stable isotope was in a food, it would be stable in the food as well, and that means it gets passed on to you, the consumer.
So the difference that happens is a process called fractionation. So when you eat things, you process them, so you can actually tell as things go up the food chain, right? So the more they're processed, and we're definitely going to talk about that in the video. So I'm not going to say too much more about that, but there are regular changes that bodies make to these heavy to light isotopes that are what we're really trying to track. And I don't think I mentioned this, but you use a mass spectrometer. There's so much jargon in this, but the mass spectrometer is actually the machine that you put the samples in, and it burns them at a really high temperature, and then it shoots all the atoms at a little plate that weighs the heavy to light isotopes. It's crazy.
Yeah, seriously. So far, all of your work is sounding either dangerous or exciting or both at the same time. I love it. So now we've got isotopes figured out. Let's go back to, and by the way, folks, the room that you're seeing in that video is our old health classroom. When the Health Museum of Cleveland merged with the Natural History Museum, that's how I ended up here, is I was teaching health programs over at the Health Museum. And we brought a whole bunch of our fun supplies over and just kept teaching health programs. So the interesting figures you see in the background, one of them is Juno, the see-through figurine with her hands up like this, that used to be automated and speak about her organs. And then there's two other on the sides of her called the Vesalius couple. Dr. Burt, I figured I'd better mention those because I have discovered there are fan clubs out there who still write, like, where's Juno?
Exactly.
So now they know where they are. Cool. Well, shall we watch section number 2 and learn about more isotopes?
Sounds great. Live. So there's actually a nerve in there and blood flow and all of that. So
and
this
comes up through there.
And it comes out through the tip. You'll notice that this tooth is a lot shorter than that tooth. And so what that is because your deciduous teeth, when the permanent teeth comes in, it causes the root to resorb, which means that it's eating away at the data that I can get, which is why I actually like teeth that were removed because they had caries in them, because then I get a full root, so I get an older signal.
I see.
If a tooth falls out, I usually only have the crown, which is the part you can see. So each tooth in your mouth has as much information below the surface as the part you can see. So the crown is only about half your tooth.
Okay. Now, you go through all of this work, sampling teeth, and then you cut them up, and you take half the tooth, and you do isotope analysis. So what do you do with that information? How do you apply that?
Yeah, so you can do some really cool things. So a lot happens between birth and 3 years of age. As you probably know, most children, historically, and probably most now, are breastfed. So you can get a signal for that. So when you consume tissues, and they make your body, you can track that with isotopes. And if you consume the tissue of your mother, which is what you're doing when you're breastfeeding, so your mother has processed the food and then reconstituted that into milk, the isotopes are elevated. So you would turn out like you're eating your mother. So it's like fake cannibalism. And so you actually get the sign of that, and you can track it.
I've never heard that before.
Right?
That's incredible. So when your mother eats a meal, say she has a chicken sandwich, the isotopes, the oxygen isotopes in the chicken or the wheat from the bread.
Yeah, so we're not using oxygen.
No.
Oxygen tells you water source.
Oh, I've got dinosaurs in the brain.
You got dinosaurs on the brain. I know where you're coming from, because that tells you location.
Okay.
So if you're looking at diet, you're using carbon and nitrogen,
Aha, okay.
which are from the protein in the foods you eat.
Okay.
So if your mom is eating chicken, or we're omnivores, which is why we have all these beautiful types of teeth that do different things. So we can eat meat and we can eat plants. So carbon will tell you things like, are you having a high sugar diet? Things like sugar cane, or a lot of high fructose corn syrup in your diet, or are you eating a lot of wheat, which are different kind of photosynthetic pathways that we can identify using carbon. And nitrogen tells you the food web position. I think hopefully everyone knows about the food web.
The face that Lee Hall made when you made that comment about consuming the tissues of your mother when you're in, I was making that same face in the background, like, that's such a cool phrase. Wow. Yeah. And I think you've just answered one other question that had come through via Facebook about how much of your job is chemistry. Most of it, a lot of it, right?
Well, it uses chemistry. I'm not like an analytical chemist. I'm not like identifying unknown chemicals, but like this wasn't mentioned, but the way that you take a tooth and get it so that you could actually run it through a mass spectrometer is you have to demineralize it using either hydrochloric acid, very weak, or EDTA, which will take all that mineral out and leave you with just a cartilaginous model. So yes, I use a lot of chemistry, but I definitely am not a chemist. I just want to be clear about that.
Uh-oh. Now I want to toss in there a Star Trek phrase. Jim, I'm a nutritional scientist, not a chemist. That's funny. But there was a lot of chemistry mentioned in that video comment, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And you were talking about things like sugarcane and corn and all these agricultural products that basically humans have so drastically modified that they're not the kind of diet that our ancient ancestors would have been eating. And then Lee tossed in there the comment about oxygen, and you were like, no, that's location. So we got to get more into this. Let's take a look at what you're doing versus what he's doing in that process of using those isotopes.
Yeah, so the isotope questions I'm usually interested in are related to diet, but you can use isotopes for other things like oxygen and hydrogen, can track water source, which has to do with location, migration. How humans move around the globe or other animals is like a huge ecological question that's super important. So to answer those questions, we tend to use oxygen. And I've done some work on that too, right? There is some value in knowing if someone grew up in a different place and then moved to the place they are as an adult. You can also then, with very early applications of carbon and nitrogen analysis, like we can actually reconstruct diet, slightly different methodology than I would be using in our early human ancestors, right? Like Australopithecines and stuff like this. So we can see transitions from the type of plant materials they would have had access to. We can see increases in meat. We can see fish being added to the diet, stuff like this through our evolutionary history. You also mentioned something which we could talk about this all day, but I want to talk about it a little bit, which is just agriculture. So agriculture in humans is fascinating for a lot of reasons. One is that you don't just go from like not domesticating or trying to control plants and animals to be like fully agriculture, right? There's a transition time. That being said, we know by at least 12,000 years before now, we had people growing like domesticated plants and having fully domesticated animals with them. But we would have been starting that process and controlling our environment way, way before that, right? So by the time we have fully modern humans, about 200,000 years ago, like so way, the dawn of human, we already have some adaptations that speak to how much we process food, as do all our ancestors, right? We would have been using tools to process food, which means that we're extracting way more nutrients. Brains are really expensive tissues, so we have to get like a lot of nutrition out of our food. We both mentioned we have cats. They're carnivores, so they're on a little bit of a different cycle, but your cat eats way less than you, right? Less than like you, even a small child, even though it's maybe, depending on your cat, could be the size of a small child. But like we have very expensive tissues, so we eat a lot. And we have evolved different ways to extract our food very quickly. But a lot of it is processing, right? So it's a cultural adaptation, and modifying our food has been another way of doing that. And so that's a lot of what the domestication process has been about, is better yield, right? If hopefully, I don't have a picture of this because we're not at the museum, so I don't have any to show you. Look at what corn used to look like and what corn is now. Corn is a grass, right? So it's crazy. So that's the type of, I could talk about this all day. We could just talk about agriculture for the next, it's so fascinating.
Well, you should. I mean, it's your research. You're allowed to talk about it all day.
Yeah. And one of the things that's really interesting is how important food is and food security is to evolution and how we think of humans, right? Humans could not, without the regularity of food source that agriculture provides, we would not be living in large cities. We would not be urbanized. None of this would have happened without this innovation. So all the way back to keeping goats and raising dogs. That's sort of the whole thing, but that's how we get to us here.
I'm going to toss out a spelling since I'm not able to type right into Facebook right now, but maybe Samantha would like to do that. Our social media gurus out there helping out. Teosinte. Teosinte. Because I teach about that in my classes. That's the name of the original grass that grows down in what's now called Mexico. That got modified, right? It's that one, right?
Yep. Yep.
It's fascinating. Look that up, folks. That's a cool one.
Too, is that food is local, right? We now live with the ability to ship food around the globe, but that's all super, well, it's not that new. Most of it is new, right? Tomatoes are New World plants. So tomatoes come from North and South America and were shipped to Europe, right, after contact. So when you think about like Italian food and the tomato being a key part of it, that's super recent. So that's what's so crazy about all of this. Like things that define culture, cooking, and things like that can actually be, in the scheme of things, a very recent introduction to that food culture. And food is fascinating.
Our viewers have to remember that you, as a scientist working at a museum, the term recent is not the same as I think what a lot of, what's recent to a museum?
Yeah, I mean, that's super recent, a couple hundred years. What?
Okay, so humans 200,000 years, whatever, that's recent, good enough. Awesome. Well, we do have one more section.
Yes, you're right. I'll stop
you and I both, because it's okay, because we work together. We're like, this is like just a regular conversation. All these other people are just sitting in listening to us, right? But I don't want to forget the last section of the video, because we had these little things portioned out. So let's run that last section, Matt. Thanks.
There's producers, herbivores, carnivores, or omnivores, and so you eat different types of things, plants, animals, etc. Going up.
And then if you're a baby, you're at the top.
Right. Babies are at the top. Exactly.
So you apply this information, this method rather. You can apply it to, you said archaeological sites.
Yeah. So the teeth that we are looking at here, these are actually some of my samples, and they're from modern Canada, which is where I developed the method. So I should say that all this, like I made that saw, I developed this method for fine-tuning isotope analysis, so that we can get changing diet. So you can actually study how a child's diet would go from breastfeeding to weaning. And we can also do that in archaeological populations, because teeth preserve really, really well. So you can actually even study isotopes in, say, early hominin remains.
Wow.
So it preserves really, really well. So it's a great technique for understanding past diets you don't know that much about. And you might think, why would you study that? In modern people, why not just ask? But like, there's been a lot of research on this, and people forget what they eat almost immediately after eating it. So you can survey people and ask, but you're really not going to know.
Yeah.
And so this is one of the few ways that you can actually get a quantitative look. And so they don't have to remember anything. I can still tell you what kinds of foods you've been eating.
Wow. That's borderline superpower.
Yeah. No,
science power.
It's science power.
So for you, this
Yeah.
board here is potentially a whole storybook of life histories.
Oh yeah, exactly. And we're assuming that those all came from one person. Probably not. So I probably have more than one life history there. And those are permanent teeth, so they tell us a slightly older story. You can also use other connective tissues. So you can use things like hair, fingernails, blood samples, all of that. And they tell you different time frames. So this tells you an old diet, like a childhood diet, right? Unless you're sampling a child, then it would match up. But hair will tell you each centimeter is about a month worth of growth. So if you did carbon and nitrogen analysis on that, you could see like how my diet has changed over the course of maybe a year or so by sampling my hair.
Wow,
or
that's
your hair.
fantastic. So we're all sort of these low, growing, living tissue databases.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the.
I love that phrase. Our bodies are just a big old growing database. Sounds so forensics, doesn't it? I love that. Now, speaking of sleuthing and forensics and such, and that way our databases, you are doing some research right now in the current times, aren't you? I want to talk about that because perhaps some of our viewers could even be a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I have a Cleveland diet project going on right now, and it really was in two sections. So there's the Are You What You Eat part, which was just started right before we went into physical distancing, working from home mode, which was collecting hair samples, which are really great ways of tracking diet over time and asking people about what they eat. But the secondary part of that study, which is still ongoing, was I'm really interested, and this is the anthropologist in me, and if people can identify foods by looking at them, like do they know what's in them? Historically, humans were much closer to food production, right? Like all of us would have had some sort of role in growing our food, but that's more and more not the case. And in fact, a lot of people don't even cook all their food themselves, so they don't necessarily know exactly what they're eating. So that what does a healthy meal look like study? I'm asking people to submit via our website images of different meals they're having and telling me some things about what's in them and if they think their diets are healthy, what they think they should be eating, all of that. And eventually that database will be uploaded as part of a second part of that study, a citizen science study, where we see if other people can identify what other people are eating, like how regular and uniform are these that people can know what would be in a picture of a meal. And it hasn't come up yet, but one of the things I'm super fascinated and interested in is that if you ask people what food is, they usually give you just a couple of things, right? They'll say like a banana and bread and chicken, but there's like so many foods you can eat, right? There's so much variety in plants and animals out there and so much local food and things like that. But that's often not how we talk about dietary recommendations. You're often not told when you're making a balanced, healthy diet, like go eat some weird, specific local food. And I mean weird in a loving way because I love weird food. But like really to be healthy, you just need all the nutrients, variety of nutrients to come into your body and enough calories, enough fat, enough carbs, enough all those things to make your body run. But there's a lot of ways to put together a healthy diet. I'm really interested in the different ways people do that and how they view it, right? So do you feel happy with the diet you're eating? Is it not the one you want? What can't you get? So that's really the foundation of that project.
I want to make sure our viewers know that the website portion that Matt was showing while you were talking, he's going to put that link, or Samantha's going to put the link in the Facebook comments. So if you folks want to participate, hey, take some pictures of your meals there and send them in to Dr. Burt. Sweet. That would be awesome. Now, I would like to mention about cooking, because one of the authors that I've used to craft my programs for kids is Michael Pollan, and he has several books and programs out there about how cooking has so changed our bodies and ourselves. And cooking changes the bioavailability of nutrients too, doesn't it? Does that mess with your isotopes as well?
It is affecting nutritional quality, but it's not really going to affect the carbon and the nitrogen in it, if that makes sense. So processing your food that way isn't going to affect what I'm specifically marketing. That being said, it does change a little bit the interpretation. However, the bigger differences that I see is like where people get sugar from, right? So in the US, almost all of our sugar is based on corn, right? Like, so we're extracting corn syrup from things and using that. In Europe, the primary source of sugar is usually beet sugar, like sweet beets is how you're going to be getting sugar, which is a different photosynthetic pathway than corn. So Europeans will have an underlying different isotopic signature because of that. So isotopes are both locally variant and more broadly variant. So that's an important thing to remember as well. Yeah, I could talk about this forever. I'm trying to keep it so we can have more questions. I'm like,
Sure.
don't get too excited.
Well, I think that's the best thing our viewers could see is a scientist who's passionate about their work. In fact, that's one of the coolest things of all these interviews is I get to see lots of scientists who are all really intensely excited about what they're doing. Since you mentioned locale, I will toss out a thought about some of the audiences that I teach are kids who live in very far remote northern portions of Canada, like Nunavut, the very highest province of Canada. And their families eat a lot of traditional foods, but they're also starting to encounter that clash of imported food from, say, the United States and eating this. Now they're eating this combination of their traditional cultural foods, which are animal products, basically. They're walrus hunting or whale meat, or fish. But these other processed foods are sneaking in. Do you see that kind of clash in your research too?
Yeah, so I work in different places, and we call that a food transition, kind of in anthropology, and it's an important thing to be studying in the relationship of how that works. It's not always bad or good. Like I don't like to set it up as bad or good, but unbalanced diets. So when they shift to too much sugar and fat in a way that isn't balanced by something else in the diet can be a problem. But traditional diets, people ate them for a tremendous amount of time because it worked, right? They survived. They had healthy, thriving communities, and so there's interest just in like there's so many ways to form diet, and people eat so many diets, both past and present, and that's a really great thing to call out too, in terms of like we also talk about in the past humans maybe ate less diversity, and that's just not true, right? So hunter-gatherers are intrinsically local. They're foraging locally, right? So if you're living in the Amazon versus somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa versus Northern Europe, right? Versus you're out in Siberia, and those are going to be different diets, right? No matter what time period you're at. So yeah, there's so many ways to make a healthy, balanced diet and get what you need. And humans have been so creative in getting the foods they need, and making those components.
And creative in figuring out ways to study ourselves, like baby teeth.
Yes.
I would have never thought of that. That's amazing. And it occurs to me that maybe now that we've invited our audience to hit that link and start taking pictures of their food and participating in that, somebody might be thinking to themselves, well, I have this box of my child's baby teeth here in the attic that I saved. Do you need that kind of supply from people?
So I do actually have IRB approval to collect baby teeth as part of the process as well. We do, everything is with ethical oversight, right? There's consent processes, all of this. For right now, everything's kind of closed because it requires physical contact. But we will be opening up soon so that people can make appointments to do safe kind of exchanges of data and things like that. But so yes, if you're interested, there's a note of that on the website too. You can reach out, and that's going to be happening soon as well.
That's pretty cool, man, because I think that's another part of museums that sometimes people don't realize is that, hey, I can be a part of the research.
Yes,
We've kind of mentioned that with other people are collecting insects now or observing birds. There are lots of things you can be doing at home during this interesting quarantine time. There was one
Absolutely.
interesting comment that I wasn't sure if it quite factored in, but maybe as a nutritional scientist, we should clarify. Since we commented on the more food that humans have consumed, that we have these big brains because of the higher nutrition available for our brains, but that does not necessarily mean the more food you eat, the bigger your brain is going to be, right?
Correct. That is a different thing. So what I'm saying is all primates eat what we would consider high quality food because we're all big brained animals, including all of the other primates. So we eat a lot of fruit and things like this, which have a lot of calorie density for the difficulty of eating it, right? So like if you're eating leaves, there's not a lot of nutrients in that for how hard it is to digest. We can't do that. We don't eat leaves. Or like cows eating grass. Like that's a very different process. So all primates have big brains. We just have extremely big brains. And having evolved that, we have also evolved the need to always eat higher quality food sources to supply it. So we have to eat. I mean, I can't even imagine if we were trying to supply our brains and one, we can't digest grass. But if we were just trying to use low nutrient quality foods, the volume of food we'd have to eat would be insane. So you can eat less food by eating higher quality food.
Oh, right.
Again, this is scientific quality, what I'm talking about.
Right. I'm thinking about animals like a koala. I just watched a show about a koala, and they were making the comment that this koala spends basically its whole life eating because it's eating these cruddy leaves that have such minimal nutritional value to them.
Yeah, they're also slightly poisoned by the eucalyptus, so they have a very different lifestyle and adapting to that. Same thing with like pandas and bamboo. Pandas are supposed to be carnivores. So like evolutionarily, they are more adapted to be carnivorous than herbivores. So there is some disconnect between their diet and what their body can do. Yeah, so we didn't go into that, but like a dog, one of the reasons dogs would have been easier to start domesticating is because they're also omnivores. So they like human food scraps, right? They eat what we eat, essentially. Whereas cats, as carnivores, are a little bit more tricky to feed, right? Because you don't want to just feed them bread. Your cat doesn't eat bread.
Well, it might, but it shouldn't.
Yeah, no, it'll eat it. It'll eat it, particularly if it's like a tortilla with lard in it. But
right. Well, it sounds like humans have kind of evolved ourselves through our behaviors and our food modifications and our agriculture, all these things we've done. We've kind of worked ourselves into a little bit of a corner here because now this big brain we have is completely dependent on us maintaining these behaviors that we've created over those 200,000 years.
It's what we call like a feedback loop, right? So things reinforce each other. And so, yeah, we have a certain lifestyle which we are accustomed to make our bodies work. You also brought up something which is one of my favorite kind of theories. We don't have like solid proof of this, but some scientists have proposed that humans are actually a domesticated animal as well, right? That we fit the definition of how we classify domesticated animals that we have domesticated, that we have also domesticated ourselves in that process, that we also can't live without human intervention.
Oh, I'm 100% domesticated. I'm going to totally use that phrase now. Next time I'm teaching the kids, I'm like, I enjoy living in this house. Thank you. As opposed to being a hunter-gatherer. I don't know if I can handle that. Oh my gosh. I just got
houses too. It's a different house, but they're living in a house.
That's true. That's true. Now, I received a lengthy question here, so I'm going to read it straight up. Hopefully I can make it through. Oh, there it is on the screen. Do you want to read it yourself? Can you see that? Ooh, Director Matt is getting all fancy. Yeah. I wonder if that's big enough for our audience to see. Should I read it out loud? Well, if you can see it, I think our audience can see it. Wow. The blood type part is great because I have heard a lot of talk about that recently, about eating toward your blood type.
There isn't really strong evidence for any of that, like scientific studies, that would be like large empirical studies. Of course, longer histories with foods do change it, right? So, okay, we'll throw a really fun fact. Everyone's going to learn the best party fact. So, lactose tolerance is a mutation that's very common in humans that evolved about 10,000 years ago. So, if you're an adult human who can drink milk, that is a recent mutation that you have. And only about a third of all humans on the planet have that adaptation. Now, the thing about adaptations is they don't just spread, well, they can spread a little bit on accident, but they have to help you with something, right? And so there is, at one point in time, an advantage to be able to drink milk as an adult, because if you had food scarcity, that would have been really important. You had to have milk present first. So domestication had already happened. Then a random mutation allowed people to drink milk later. They're not causal. Having domesticated animals doesn't cause you to drink milk. But then once both those random kind of things that have to align happen, you can evolve to drink milk as an adult. And so populations that historically had that relationship, such as African herding populations and Northern European herding populations, have really high prevalence of lactose tolerance, and everyone else's is kind of lower. And it's spreading because now it's so predominant that it is spreading outside of those populations. But that's a really good, clear relationship between like a local evolutionary selective factor that affected how people eat and food culture very widely beyond that.
And that all still harkens back to the fact that I just love saying that humans are weird, because we are across the entire planet, living in every single habitat you could possibly think of, and eating such diverse diets and changing our diets as we move. It's cool stuff. And so cool that you can learn so much of it from a tooth. I mean, that's pretty awesome. Next time you brush your teeth, folks, I want you to think about
Dr. Teeth are option. Like, you think about how you can only see half of your tooth. Think about that every time. All the teeth are all up in your jaws.
I love it. It's fascinating stuff, man. Well, gosh, thanks, Lance, for that question. Thanks, everybody, for your comments today. And Dr. Burt, thank you for letting us hang out and chat with you this fine Saturday afternoon. Make sure to check the link, everybody, and be a part of this research. We need more pictures of your food. And did you need to remind them anything else about that? Was there any other details when they get involved with that project that they should be prepared to deal with?
The consent form lays everything out when you go to the website, so you can read all about it. Decide what to do.
Awesome. Very cool. And you and I had already decided in advance we were going to use this particular sentence to wrap up the discussion, since we were talking about nutrition and how a healthy diet is so important for this big brain. So thank you, Dr. Burt. Thank you, audience, for watching. Appreciate you hanging out for Scientist Saturdays. Don't forget, there's another one next Saturday with our new paleontologist, Dr. Caitlin. I messed up her name because she's so new to us, Dr. Caitlin Collery. So come back next Saturday, folks. And here's the big finale that Dr. Burt has approved. Don't forget to wash your hands and eat your vegetables.
You're welcome.
Bye, folks. Thanks, Dr. Burt.
Bye.